turn, you'll pick one of two options. Either move your pawn or place a wall. You will only have access to the walls on your side of the board, so once these run out, the only option you'll have for the rest of the game is to move your pawn. If you choose to move your pawn, that's easy. Just go from the space you are on to any adjacent horizontal or vertical space. You can even move backwards if you like, though usually you won't want to if you can help it. Instead of moving, you can choose to place a fence on your turn. Just take any one of them from behind your baseline and then place it between any two sets of squares, either vertically or horizontally. Fences placed later can go anywhere. They don't have to be adjacent to other fence pieces, but you can put them adjacent if you'd like, even placing them like this. Just make sure your fences line up properly with the squares. You cannot, for example, put a fence like this, where it would then have a total of 3 squares on either side of it. When properly placed, a fence will only have 2 squares on either side of it. Fences block pawn movements. You'll have to move around them, which will slow down your efforts to get to the other side. For example, in this case, I might move here on my next turn to try to avoid this obstruction. The only other rule about placing fences is that you cannot place one in such a way that it would completely block access to an opponent's back line. For example, this light-colored pawn is just trying to get to any one of these spaces, and their opponent has done a pretty good job of making that difficult by creating this line of fences. They're now going to have to travel back here and then down this narrow corridor to get to this space. But this also means that no player can place a fence in this position, because then the light-colored pawn would have no way of getting to their objective, so this fence would have to go somewhere else. If two pawns are ever face to face and a wall doesn't separate them, then you may move your pawn forward by jumping over your opponent into the space on the other side of them. Now, if there had been a fence behind the opponent, let's say like this, then this is the one situation where you're allowed to move diagonally. So for example, I could move to any one of these spaces like normal, or diagonally to either this space or this one over here. Now, if a wall is on one side of your opponent's pawn like this, then that would block a diagonal move in this direction. So instead, if I wanted to go diagonally, I'd have to go over here. With those rules for movement understood, the game will continue with turns going back and forth, with players either placing fences or moving their pawn, until eventually one of the players gets their pawn to any one of the 9 spaces next to their opponent's baseline. As soon as that happens, they are declared the winner.